In the days of the great King Arthur, there lived a mighty magician called Merlin, the most learned and skillful enchanter the world has ever seen. This famous magician, who could take any form he pleased, was once travelling about as a poor beggar, and being very tired, he stopped at the cottage of a peasant to rest himself and asked for food. The farmer bade him welcome, and his wife, who was a good-hearted woman, soon brought him some milk in a wooden bowl and some coarse brown bread on a platter. Merlin was much pleased with the kindness of the peasant and his wife, but he could not help noticing that though everything was neat and comfortable in the cottage, they both seemed to be very unhappy. He therefore asked them why they were so melancholy, and learned that they were miserable because they had no children. The poor woman said, with tears in her eyes, "I should be the happiest creature in the world if I had a son, and even if he was no bigger than my husband's thumb, I would be satisfied." Merlin was so amused with the idea of a boy no bigger than a man's thumb that he determined to grant the poor woman's wish. Accordingly, in a little while, the peasant's wife had a son who, wonderful to relate, was no bigger than the father's thumb. The queen of the fairies wished to see the little fellow, came in the window while his mother was sitting up in bed admiring him. The queen kissed the child and gave him the name Tom Thumb, and sent for some of the other fairies, who dressed her little grandson according to her orders. An oak leaf hat he had for his crown, his skirt of web by spiders spun, his jacket wove of thistles down, his trousers were of feathers done, his stockings an apple rind they tie, with eyelash from his mother's eye. His shoes were made of mouse's skin, tanned with the downy hair within. Tom never grew any larger than his father's thumb, which was only of an ordinary size. But as he got older, he became very cunning and full of tricks. When he was old enough to play with the boys, and had lost all of his own marbles, he would creep into the bag of his playfellows and fill his pockets with theirs. Then, getting out, without noticing them, Tom would again join the game. One day, however, he was coming out of a bag of marbles, where he had been stealing as usual. The boy to whom it belonged chanced to see him. "Ha, my little Tommy," said the boy, "so I have caught you stealing my marbles at last, and you shall be rewarded for your thievish tricks." On saying this, he drew the string tight around Tom's neck, and gave the bag such a hearty shake that poor little Tom's legs and thighs and body were badly bruised. He roared out with pain, and begged the fellow to let him out, promising to never steal again. A short time afterward, Tom's mother was making a batter pudding, and, being very anxious to see how it was made, he climbed up to the edge of the bowl, but his foot slipped, and he plummeted head over heels into the bowl without his mother noticing him. She stirred him into the pudding and set him into the pot to boil. The batter filled Tom's mouth and prevented him from crying out, and the hot water began to scald him, and he kicked and struggled so much in the pot that his mother thought the pudding was bewitched, and pulling it out of the pot, she threw it outside the door. A poor tinker who was passing by picked up the pudding, and putting it in his knapsack, walked off. As Tom had now got his mouth cleared of the batter, he began to cry aloud, which so frightened the tinker that he flung down the pudding and ran away. The pudding broke into pieces in the fall, and Tom crept out, covered all over with the batter, and walked home. His mother, who was very sorry to hear her darling in such a woeful state, put him into a teacup and soon washed off the batter, after which she kissed him and put him to bed. Soon after the adventure of the pudding, Tom's mother went to milk her cow in the meadow, and she took Tom along with her. The wind was very high, and fearing he would be blown away, she tied him to a thistle with a piece of fine thread. The cow soon observed Tom's little oak leaf hat, and liking the appearance of it, took poor Tom and his hat and the thistle in one mouthful. While the cow was chewing the thistle, Tom was afraid of her great teeth, which threatened to crush him in pieces, and he roared out as loud as he could, "Mother, mother!" "Where are you, Tommy, my dear Tommy?" said the mother. "Here, mother, in the red cow's mouth." His mother began to cry and wring her hands, but the cow, surprised at the odd noise in her throat, opened her mouth to let Tom out. Fortunately, his mother caught him in her apron as he was falling, or he might have been dreadfully hurt. She then put Tom inside her blouse and quickly ran home with him. Tom's father made him a whip of barley straw to drive the cattle with, and having one day gone into the fields, Tom slipped and rolled into a furrow. A raven, which was flying past, picked him up, flew with him over the sea, and there dropped him. A large fish swallowed Tom, and the moment he fell into the sea, soon after, this fish was caught and brought for the table of King Arthur. When they opened the fish in order to cook it, everyone was very astonished at finding such a little boy. Tom was quite delighted at being freed again. They carried him to the king, who made Tom his dwarf, and he soon became a great favourite at court. By his tricks and gambols, he not only amused the king and queen, but the knights of the Round Table as well. It is said that when the king rode out on horseback, he often took Tom along, and if a shower came, Tom would creep into his majesty's vest pocket and sleep until the rain was over. King Arthur one day asked Tom about his parents, wishing to know if they were as small as he was, and whether or not they were well off. Tom told the king that his father and mother were as tall as anybody in the court, and that they were in poor circumstances. On hearing this, the king carried Tom to his treasury, where he kept his money, and told him to take as much money as he could carry home to his parents, which made the poor fellow caper with joy. Tom went to procure a purse which was made out of a water bubble, and King Arthur gave him a large silver piece to put into it. Our little hero had some difficulty in lifting the burden upon his back, but at last he succeeded in getting it placed to his liking, and set forward on his journey. Without meeting any accident, and after resting himself more than 100 times by the wayside, in 2 days and 2 nights he reached his parents' house in safety. Tom had travelled 48 hours with a huge silver piece on his back, and was almost tired to death when his mother ran out to meet him, and carried him into the house. But he soon returned to King Arthur's court. As Tom's clothes had suffered much in the battered pudding and the inside of the fish, His Majesty ordered him a new suit of clothes, and announced he would be mounted as a knight on a mouse. Of butterflies' wings his shirt was made, his boots of chicken's hide, and by a nimble fairy blade, well learned in the tailoring trade, his clothing was supplied. A needle dangled by his side, a dapper mouse he used to ride. Thus strutted Tom in stately pride. It was certainly very diverting to see Tom in his dress and mounted on the mouse as he rode out hunting with the king and nobility, who were ready to expire with laughter at the sight of Tom and his fine prancing charger. The king was so charmed with his manner that he ordered a little chair be made, in order that Tom might sit upon the round table, and a palace of gold 1 foot high, with a door 1 inch wide, to live in. He also gave Tom a coach drawn by 6 little mice. The queen was so enraged at the honours that were being conferred on Sir Thomas, that she resolved to ruin him, and told the king that the little knight had been saucy to her. The king sent for Tom in great haste, but being fully aware of the danger of royal anger, Tom crept into an empty snail shell, where he lay for a long time until he was almost starved with hunger. At last he ventured to peep out, and seeing a fine large butterfly on the ground near his hiding place, he got close to it, and, jumping astride it, was carried up into the air. The butterfly flew with him from flower to flower, and from tree to tree, and from field to field, and at last returned to the court, where the king and nobility all strove to catch hold of him. But poor Tom finally fell from his seat into a watering pot, in which he was almost drowned. When the queen saw him, she was angry, and said he should be beheaded, and so Tom was put into a mousetrap to wait for his execution. However, a cat, observing something alive in the trap, patted it about till the wires broke, and set Thomas at liberty. The king received Tom into his favour once again, but Tom did not live to enjoy it, for a large spider one day attacked him, and although he drew his sword and fought well, the spider's poison at last overcame him. He fell dead on the ground where he stood, and the spider sucked every drop of his blood. King Arthur and his whole court were so sorry at the loss of their little favourite that they went into mourning and raised a fine white marble monument over his grave with the following epitaph: Here lies Tom Thumb, King Arthur's knight, who died by a spider's cruel bite. He was well known in Arthur's court, where he afforded gallant sport. He rode a tilt in tournament, and on a mouse a hunting went. Alive he filled the court with mirth, his death to sorrow soon gave birth. Wipe your eyes and shake your head, and cry, Alas, Tom Thumb is dead. Tom Thumb.